You share more in common with a lobster than you'd ever want to admit. 350 million years ago, long before dinosaurs, long before trees, long before anything resembling a human being walked this earth, lobsters were already competing for territory, already fighting for status, and already running on the exact same brain chemical that right now, today, is determining whether you feel confident or defeated. That chemical is serotonin. And here is where it gets strange. If you give a lobster Prozac, the same antidepressant prescribed to millions of human beings, it cheers up, it stands taller, it fights harder. The same drug, the same molecule, the same effect, separated by 1/3 of a billion years of evolution. So what does a crustacean on the ocean floor have to teach you about standing up for yourself, choosing real friends, raising your children, and putting your life in order? More than you think. A lot more. This is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Peterson is a clinical psychologist and university professor who spent more than 20 years treating clients, studying personality, and trying to answer one of the hardest questions a person can ask. Why do people suffer, and what can be done about it? Not in some abstract academic way, in a way that actually changes how you live on a Monday morning. This book became one of the best-selling non-fiction titles of the past decade, translated into more than 50 languages. But here is what matters more than the sales numbers. It resonated because it spoke to something people already felt, but couldn't quite put into words. That life is difficult, that suffering is not optional, and that despite all of that, there are ways of being, specific, practical, ancient ways of being, that can make you strong enough to carry the weight. Peterson draws on evolutionary biology, clinical psychology, philosophy, religious mythology, and his own often painful personal experiences to lay out 12 principles for living a meaningful life. Not a comfortable life, not an easy life, a meaningful one. And there is a very big difference between those two things. Over the next hour, I'll walk you through the first 6 of those 12 rules. We'll start 350 million years in the past, on the ocean floor, and we'll end with a challenge that might be the hardest thing you'll ever do. Looking honestly at your own life before you dare to criticize anyone else's. Let's begin. Rule 1. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Picture a lobster on the ocean floor. He's looking for a home, a safe crevice under a rock where he can rest, shed his shell when the time comes, and be protected from predators. The problem is, good shelters are scarce, and there are a lot of lobsters. So when 2 lobsters meet near the same prime piece of real estate, something has to happen. They have to decide who gets it. And here's the remarkable thing. They don't just charge at each other blindly. They've developed an elaborate, multi-stage conflict resolution system that has been refined over hundreds of millions of years. First, they size each other up. They circle, claws open, spraying chemical jets from special nozzles under their eyes. Those jets contain information about size, health, mood, and fighting history. Sometimes that's enough. A smaller lobster reads the signals, decides this isn't his fight, and backs away. No blood spilled, problem solved. But if the 2 are closely matched, they escalate. They advance and retreat, antennae whipping. If neither backs down, the claws come out. They grapple, each trying to flip the other onto its back. A lobster that gets flipped usually concedes, and if even that doesn't settle it, they tear at each other, ripping off legs, claws, antennae. One wins, one loses, and sometimes the loser doesn't survive. Now here is what matters. After a lobster loses a serious fight, its brain chemistry physically changes. The ratio of serotonin to octopamine shifts dramatically. The defeated lobster produces less serotonin and more octopamine, and in response, its posture collapses. It hunches. It curls in on itself. It becomes skittish, reactive, and withdrawn. It won't fight again, even against opponents it could easily beat. It has been reprogrammed neurochemically for defeat, and if the defeat is severe enough, something even more extreme happens. The lobster's brain essentially dissolves. It grows a new one, a smaller subordinate brain, more suited to its new lowly position. The brain it had when it was dominant simply cannot handle the transformation from king to bottom dweller without being completely rebuilt. Now you might be thinking, that's a fascinating nature documentary, but what does any of it have to do with me? I'm not a lobster. I don't live on the ocean floor, but you do live inside a dominance hierarchy. You always have. Every human society ever studied has one. Every workplace, every school, every family, every social group, they all have a pecking order. And deep in the most ancient part of your brain, far beneath your conscious thoughts and your civilized manners, sits a calculator that has been tracking your position in that hierarchy since the day you were born. That calculator runs on serotonin, the same chemical, the same system, 350 million years old. When you're doing well, when people respect you, when your work is going right, when your relationships are stable, that ancient calculator registers a high position. Serotonin flows freely. You stand tall, you feel confident, you sleep well, you think clearly. You can plan for the future because, as far as your brain is concerned, the future looks safe enough to invest in. But when you're losing, when you've been rejected, fired, humiliated, betrayed, the calculator drops your status, serotonin falls, and everything changes. Your posture collapses, you become anxious, reactive, and impulsive. You start making short-term decisions because your brain no longer trusts the future. You're more vulnerable to illness, more susceptible to addiction, more likely to take desperate risks for fleeting pleasure because the ancient system running your body has concluded that things are unlikely to improve. And here is the cruelest part. Once you start losing, you're statistically more likely to keep losing. The lobster that lost its last fight is more likely to lose the next one. Not because its opponent is stronger, but because the loser no longer believes in itself. Its brain has been chemically rewired for submission. This is what Peterson calls the principle of unequal distribution. Winners tend to keep winning, losers tend to keep losing. The rich get richer, the defeated get more defeated, and the gap between them compounds over time. You've seen this in people. Think about someone you know, maybe even yourself, who went through a bad stretch, a painful breakup, a job loss, a period of bullying. What happens? The shoulders curve inward, the eyes drop to the floor, the voice gets quieter, the body physically shrinks, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. And other people notice. They don't always notice consciously, but their ancient calculators do. They read the signals and conclude, this person is low status. This person is not a threat. This person can be ignored, or worse, targeted. And so the cycle continues. The person who was bullied as a child carries that defeated posture into adulthood. The physiological adaptation that once made sense, cringe, retreat, avoid confrontation, is now counterproductive. But the body doesn't know that. The body is still living in the past, and the past keeps recreating itself. So what breaks the cycle? Peterson's answer is deceptively simple, but it cuts deep. He says, stand up straight, literally. Pull your shoulders back. Lift your chin. Look people in the eye. Not because it's a magic trick, not because posture alone will fix your life, but because your body and your mind are not separate systems. They are one system, and the relationship between them runs in both directions. If you're feeling defeated and you hunch over, the hunching reinforces the feeling. Your brain reads your own body language and concludes, yes, we're still losing. But if you straighten up, even when you don't feel like it, your brain reads that signal too. It registers the posture of someone who is at least willing to engage, and the serotonin system responds. Researchers have actually tested this. If you ask people to arrange their facial muscles into a sad expression, one muscle at a time, without telling them what emotion they're mimicking, they report feeling sadder, If you arrange their faces into a smile, they feel happier. Emotion is not just something that happens inside your head. It is something your body performs, and performance can be directed. But this goes far beyond posture. Standing up straight with your shoulders back is not just a physical instruction. It's a metaphor for how you engage with life itself. Peterson writes that standing up means voluntarily accepting the burden of being. It means deciding to face the world instead of cowering from it. It means stepping forward into the dominance hierarchy, not to dominate, not to crush others, but to occupy your rightful territory and defend it, to say, I exist, I matter, I have a right to be here. And when you do that, something remarkable happens. People start treating you differently. Not because you've changed what you know, or what you own, or what you've accomplished, but because you've changed the signal you're broadcasting. You look like someone who can handle things, and the world, which was previously stacking the odds against you, begins to tilt, just slightly but measurably in your favor. The conversations go better, the opportunities appear more frequently, the serotonin rises, and the ancient calculator recalibrates. This is not positive thinking. Peterson is very clear about that. He's not asking you to lie to yourself. He's asking you to recognize that the feedback loop between your body, your mind, and the social world around you is real, it is ancient, and it can work for you just as easily as it has been working against you. If you present yourself as defeated, the world will treat you as defeated. If you stand up physically, psychologically, spiritually, the world will respond to that too. Look at the lobster. 350 million years of evolutionary wisdom encoded in that simple, armored body. It knows something you've forgotten. Your posture is not cosmetic. It is a declaration. It tells the world, and it tells you, whether you intend to face what's coming or collapse under its weight. So tend carefully to your posture. Quit drooping and hunching around. Speak your mind. Put your desires forward as if you had a right to them, at least the same right as others. Walk tall, gaze forthrightly ahead, dare to be dangerous, and encourage the serotonin to flow plentifully through the neural pathways desperate for its calming influence. Stand up straight with your shoulders back. Rule 2. Treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping. Imagine that 100 people are prescribed a medication by their doctor, a drug that could help them, maybe even save their life. What happens next? 1/3 of those 100 people will never fill the prescription. They'll walk out of the doctor's office, drive past the pharmacy, and never pick it up. Of the remaining 67 who do fill it, about half won't take it correctly. They'll miss doses. They'll quit early. Some won't take it at all. The bottle will sit in the medicine cabinet, untouched, gathering dust. Now think about what that means. A trained physician examined them, identified a problem, and offered a solution. And more than half of them, silently, passively, without any dramatic act of rebellion, simply refused to follow through. Now imagine something different. Imagine it's not you who's sick. It's your dog. You love that dog. He's been limping. You take him to the vet. The vet gives you a prescription. What happens? You fill it. You administer it on schedule. You follow the instructions to the letter. You might even set an alarm on your phone to make sure you don't forget. People are better at filling prescriptions for their pets than for themselves. Think about that. Your golden retriever gets more reliable medical care from you than you get from you. And it doesn't stop at prescriptions. Consider organ transplants. Some people wait years for a donated kidney. Years on dialysis, a brutal process, 5 to 7 times a week, 8 hours at a time. Blood pumped out of the body, through a machine and back in. Finally, after all that waiting and suffering, they receive the transplant. And then they don't take the anti-rejection drugs. They lose the kidney. They lose everything. How is this possible? How can someone endure that much, sacrifice that much, wait that long, and then sabotage their own recovery? There are practical explanations, of course. Some people are isolated. some are depressed, some can barely afford the medication. But those explanations, while real, don't fully account for the pattern. Something deeper is at work. Peterson believes the answer lies buried in one of the oldest stories ever told, the story of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. And before you tune out because this sounds religious, stay with me. Peterson isn't reading it as theology, he's reading it as psychology. He's asking, what does this ancient story reveal about how human beings actually experience themselves? Here's the short version. Adam and Eve live in paradise. They walk with God. They're naked and they're not ashamed. They're innocent, which is another way of saying they're unconscious. They don't know who they are yet. Then the serpent appears and tempts Eve to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She does. She shares it with Adam, and their eyes are opened. That sounds like it should be a good thing. But what do they see the moment their eyes open? They see that they're naked. They see their own vulnerability. They see that their bodies are fragile and exposed and imperfect. And for the first time, they feel shame. They scramble to cover themselves. They hide from God. Now, if you've ever stood in front of a mirror and felt a wave of self-disgust, if you've ever looked at your own body, your own face, your own life and thought, I'm not enough, then you already understand this story at a gut level. The fruit didn't give Adam and Eve some abstract philosophical knowledge. It gave them self-consciousness. And self-consciousness is a brutal gift, because once you can see yourself, you can see everything that's wrong with yourself. And it gets worse, because once you know how you can be hurt, once you understand your own vulnerabilities, you also know how to hurt others. You know exactly where to aim. You know what words will cut the deepest. You know how to humiliate, how to betray, how to twist the knife. That's the knowledge of good and evil. Not just knowing that suffering exists, but knowing how to create it deliberately. This is why, according to Peterson, we don't take care of ourselves. It's not laziness. It's not stupidity. It's something far more disturbing. We know too much about ourselves. We know our own cowardice, our own dishonesty, our own petty cruelties. We know every shortcut we've taken, every promise we've broken, every time we looked the other way when we shouldn't have. No one knows your failures more intimately than you do, and deep down, some part of you has concluded that a creature this flawed doesn't deserve to be taken care of. A dog, though, a dog is innocent. A dog hasn't betrayed anyone. A dog hasn't lied or cheated or acted against its own conscience. A dog is pure in a way that no self-aware human being can ever be again. So of course you'll give the dog its medicine. The dog deserves it. But here is where Peterson turns the whole thing on its head. He says, you are not just your failures. Yes, you're flawed. Yes, you've done things you're ashamed of. Every human being has. But you're also someone who gets up every morning and tries. You're someone who holds things together even when they're falling apart. You go to work when you're sick. You comfort your children when you're afraid. You show up for people who need you even when you have nothing left. And that, the quiet, unglamorous, daily heroism of ordinary people just keeping the world running, that is miraculous. It deserves respect. It deserves care. Peterson tells a story about two men he knew, both damaged. One had been injured in a car accident. The other had a degenerative neurological disease. Neither could do their job alone, but together, one compensating for what the other lacked. They worked side by side for years, repairing utility lines, each one covering for his partner's limitations. Neither of them complained. Neither of them quit. That's what people do, all the time, everywhere. They carry impossible burdens and they keep going. They hold families together through grief and illness and financial ruin. They raise children under conditions that would break a lesser species, and they do it without applause, without recognition, without anyone stopping to say, you know what, that's incredible. The fact that you're still standing is a miracle. So Peterson's second rule is not a soft suggestion, it's a moral obligation. Treat yourself like someone you are responsible for helping, not someone you can neglect, punish, or abandon, not someone whose needs don't matter. You are not merely your own worst critic. You are also the only person who can reliably steer your life in the right direction. And if you won't take care of yourself, you can't take care of anyone else either. Your family needs you functional. Your friends need you present. The world needs whatever it is you have to offer, and you can't offer it if you've let yourself fall apart. This doesn't mean being self-indulgent. Peterson is very clear about that. Treating yourself well is not the same as giving yourself whatever you want in the moment. You don't help a child by feeding them candy for every meal. You help a child by making sure they brush their teeth, wear their coat in the cold, and learn to be responsible. The same applies to you. Ask yourself, what would genuinely be good for me? Not what would feel good right now. What would make me stronger, healthier, more capable, more honest? What career would challenge me? What habits would improve my health? What relationships would I need to repair? Define who you are. Refine your personality. Choose your destination and articulate your being. Then take care of yourself. Not because you're perfect, but because the task ahead of you is difficult, and you'll need every ounce of strength you can gather. You would do it for your dog. You would do it for your child. Now do it for yourself. Rule 3. Make friends with people who want the best for you. Peterson grew up in Fairview, Alberta, a small town of about 3,000 people, 400 miles from the nearest city. Cable television didn't exist yet. Neither did video games or the internet. Winters lasted 5 months. Temperatures dropped to 40 below, and the darkness was almost total. By December, the sun didn't rise until 9:30 in the morning, and it was nearly gone again by the time school let out. There wasn't much for young people to do, so they drove endlessly, around and around the same handful of streets, up Main, past the high school, around the north end of town, down to the west side and back. If they weren't driving in town, they were driving in the countryside, on the grid of gravel roads that stretched forever across the flat prairie. And if they weren't driving, they were at a party. The parties were not good. The lights were always low. The music was too loud for conversation, which didn't matter much because there was little to say. Someone was always too drunk. Someone was always too aggressive. There was a dreary, suffocating aimlessness to all of it. The unspoken agreement that nothing was really going to happen, and that was fine, and nobody was going to mention it. Peterson had a friend. We'll call him Chris. Chris was smart. He read science fiction. He liked electronics and engineering. He had real potential, but something in his family had gone wrong. Something Peterson could never quite identify, and Chris had been left unattended to in some important way. Despite his intelligence, he was angry, resentful, and hopeless. Chris drove a battered 1972 blue Ford pickup with dents in every quarter panel and matching dents inside from where his friends' bodies had slammed against the interior during his many accidents. The bumper sticker read, "Be alert, the world needs more alerts." It would have been funnier if it weren't so obviously a manifesto. Every time Chris wrecked the truck, his father fixed it and bought him something else, a motorbike he didn't care for, an ice cream van he never used to sell ice cream. Chris had a younger cousin named Ed. Tall, good-looking, charming, witty. You would have predicted a bright future for Ed if you'd met him when he was 12. But Ed drifted downward too, slowly, into a half-formed, semi-drifting life, dropping out, smoking pot, hanging around people who were going nowhere. Neither Chris nor Ed improved after they discovered marijuana. Some people can handle it. These two couldn't. It didn't make them more creative or more relaxed. It made them foggier, slower, and less likely to ever climb out of the hole they were sinking into. Years later, after Peterson had moved to Edmonton for university, Ed showed up at his apartment. Peterson was glad to see him. He hoped Ed had turned things around, but Ed arrived looking older, bolder, and stooped. His eyes were the red slits of a habitual stoner. He'd taken a lawn mowing job, which would have been fine for a student, but which was a dead end for someone with his intelligence. And he'd brought a friend. The friend was obliterated, completely stoned. He could barely sit upright. He looked around Peterson's clean, civilized apartment as if he'd arrived on a different planet. At one point he stared at the ceiling and managed to say, and these were his only words, "My particles are scattered all over the ceiling." Truer words were never spoken. Peterson took Ed aside and told him politely that he had to leave, that he shouldn't have brought this person into his home. Ed nodded. He understood, and that was almost worse, because understanding meant he knew exactly what he'd become, and he'd shown up anyway. Chris later wrote Peterson a letter. One line from it stayed with him for decades. "I had friends," Chris wrote, "before. Anyone with enough self-contempt that they could forgive me mine." Think about that sentence. Read it again in your mind. Anyone with enough self-contempt that they could forgive me mine. That is the operating principle behind every destructive friendship you've ever witnessed or been part of. People don't always choose bad friends because they can't find good ones. Sometimes they choose bad friends because bad friends won't challenge them to change. Bad friends will let you stay exactly where you are. They won't raise an eyebrow when you waste another evening, skip another opportunity, or make the same mistake for the 20th time, and in exchange, you extend them the same courtesy. It's a pact, an unspoken mutual agreement to sacrifice the future for the comfort of the present. You don't call me on my failures, and I won't call you on yours. That way we can both avoid the terrifying work of actually becoming better. But what about compassion? What about loyalty? What about not abandoning people when they're down? Peterson addresses this head-on, and his answer is uncomfortable. He says, before you help someone, you should find out why that person is in trouble. Not everyone who is failing is a victim of unjust circumstances. Some people are failing because they have chosen to fail. Some people have decided, consciously or unconsciously, that the path upward is too difficult and have settled for the path down. And if you attach yourself to someone like that out of pity or guilt or a desire to feel virtuous, you're not rescuing them, you're sinking with them. Peterson points to a fascinating finding from organizational psychology. Imagine a high-performing team. Everyone is sharp, motivated, and working toward a shared goal. Now take one underperforming, cynical, unmotivated person and place them in the middle of that team. What happens? Does the struggling newcomer rise to the occasion? Almost never. Instead, the entire team degenerates. The hard workers start to feel resentful. The newcomer's laziness becomes contagious. Morale drops. Quality drops. The same pattern holds when a delinquent teenager is placed among well-behaved peers. The delinquency spreads. The stability doesn't. Down is a lot easier than up. This doesn't mean you should never help anyone. It means you should be honest about your motives. Are you helping because you genuinely believe this person wants to improve and is willing to do the work? Or are you helping because it makes you feel morally superior? Because it's easier than confronting your own problems? Because the contrast between your friend's disaster and your own life makes you feel like you're doing all right by comparison? Peterson puts it bluntly. If you have a friend whose friendship you wouldn't recommend to your sister, or your father, or your son, why would you have such a friend for yourself? You might call it loyalty, but loyalty is not the same as stupidity. Loyalty must be negotiated, fairly and honestly. Friendship is a reciprocal arrangement. Now here's the other side. If you surround yourself with people who support your upward aim, people who are genuinely trying to improve their own lives, they will not tolerate your cynicism. They will encourage you when you do something right. They will push back carefully when you do something wrong. They will hold you to a standard, not because they want to control you, but because they want you to succeed, and their success in turn will challenge and inspire you, not because they're showing off, but but because every good example is a silent invitation. It says, you could be more than you are. Chris never found those people. Or maybe he found them and couldn't stay near them, because standing next to someone who is genuinely trying makes your own refusal to try almost unbearable. Not long after his 40th birthday, the night before in fact, Chris drove his old pickup into the bush, ran a hose from the exhaust pipe to the cab, and sat there in the front seat, smoking, waiting. Peterson called his father afterward. "My beautiful boy," the old man sobbed. "Friendship is not a trivial thing. It is not a convenience or a pastime. The people you surround yourself with will shape the trajectory of your life more profoundly than almost any other single factor. They will either pull you upward or drag you down, and the choice of which kind of person to keep close, that is one of the most important decisions you will ever make. Choose people who want things to be better, not worse. It's a good thing, not a selfish thing, to choose people who are good for you. It is appropriate and praiseworthy to associate with people whose lives would be improved if they saw your life improve. Make friends with people who want the best for you. Rule 4. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. A cognitive psychologist named Daniel Simons once conducted one of the most famous experiments in the history of psychology. He sat his research subjects in front of a screen and showed them a short video. In the video, 2 teams of 3 people, one team in white shirts, the other in black, bounce and pass basketballs back and forth in a small space. Simons asked his subjects to count the number of passes made by the team in white. The subjects watched carefully. They counted. When the video ended, Simons asked for their answer. Most said 15. That was correct. They felt good about it. They'd passed the test. Then Simons asked a second question. "Did you see the gorilla?" The subject stared at him. "What gorilla?" So he played the video again. And there it was. About a minute in, a person in a full gorilla suit walks directly into the middle of the game, stops, faces the camera, beats its chest, and walks off, right through the center of the screen. Enormous, unmistakable, impossible to miss, except that half the people watching missed it completely. They were so focused on counting passes that a chest-beating gorilla standing directly in front of them was invisible. Simons didn't stop there. In a later experiment, he showed subjects a video of a person being served at a counter. The server ducks behind the counter to grab something, and a completely different person stands back up. Different face, different body, sometimes even a different gender or race, and most subjects didn't notice. What does this tell us? It tells us that we are almost entirely blind. Not physically, our eyes work fine, but our perception is ruthlessly selective. We see what we're aiming at, and we are blind to virtually everything else. This is not a flaw, it's a necessity. The world is so overwhelmingly complex that if you tried to perceive all of it simultaneously, you would be paralyzed. Your brain doesn't have the processing power, so it makes a deal with reality. I'll focus on this one narrow slice, and I'll let everything else disappear. This is why what you aim at matters so much. Your values, the things you've decided are important, don't just guide your actions. They literally determine what you can see. If you're focused on counting passes, gorillas are invisible. If you're focused on your boss's job, your own opportunities disappear. If you're focused on what someone else has, you become blind to what you already possess. And this is where comparison becomes toxic. Peterson doesn't say that standards are irrelevant. They're not. You need standards. Without some concept of better and worse, you have no reason to do anything at all. The internal critic that says you could do better is not your enemy. It's a necessary voice. Without it, you'd never improve. The problem arises when that critic selects a single, arbitrary dimension of comparison, money maybe, or beauty, or status, treats it as if it's the only dimension that exists, and then measures you against someone who is world-class in that exact domain. You're a decent guitar player. but you're not Jimi Hendrix. You're a good cook, but you'll never run a Michelin-starred restaurant. You're a reasonably successful professional, but someone out there is younger, richer, and more accomplished. The internal critic seizes on these comparisons and builds a devastating case. You see, it whispers, you're mediocre, you're ordinary, nothing you do matters. But that voice is lying to you, or rather it's telling you a very small, very distorted piece of the truth and presenting it as the whole story. Because here is what it leaves out. You are not playing one game, you are playing many games simultaneously. You have a career and a family and friendships and personal projects and a body and a mind and a spiritual life. You might be struggling at work but thriving as a parent. You might be financially strained but deeply loved. You might be losing at one game while quietly winning at 3 others you haven't even bothered to notice. Furthermore, the specifics of your life are so unique, so particular to you, that comparison with anyone else is almost meaningless. Your colleague earns more than you, but his marriage is collapsing. The celebrity you admire has a public drinking problem. The neighbor with the bigger house is privately miserable. You don't know what anyone else's life actually looks like from the inside. You only know the curated, polished, public-facing version. And you're comparing that to the uncensored, unfiltered, every flaw visible version of yourself. So what's the alternative? If you shouldn't compare yourself to other people, what do you compare yourself to? Yesterday. You compare yourself to who you were yesterday. That's a game you can actually win. Not by achieving some grand transformation overnight, but by making things just slightly better today than they were the day before. One small repair, one honest conversation, one neglected task finally completed, one corner of your life straightened out. Peterson describes this as a kind of internal negotiation, and the way he frames it is unexpectedly gentle. He says, imagine that you are someone difficult to motivate. Imagine you're lazy and resentful and hard to get along with. You can't just bark orders at yourself and expect compliance. That makes you a tyrant, and no one cooperates with a tyrant for long, not even you. So instead, you negotiate. You ask yourself, politely, without sarcasm, is there one thing I could do today that would make things slightly better? One thing I would actually be willing to do. And then you listen for the answer. Maybe it's clearing that stack of papers off your desk. Maybe it's making a phone call you've been avoiding. Maybe it's apologizing to someone you hurt. Whatever it is, you do it. And then, this is the crucial part, you reward yourself. You have that coffee, you watch that show, you take that walk. Because if you promise yourself something in exchange for effort, and then you don't deliver, you will never trust yourself again. Do that every day. Just one small voluntary improvement. And watch what happens over weeks and months and years. Your baseline shifts upward. What was once difficult becomes routine. What was once unimaginable becomes merely hard. The compound interest of tiny daily improvements is staggering. 3 years of that, and your life will be unrecognizable. Not because you performed some heroic act, but because you stopped comparing yourself to everyone else and started, quietly and consistently, outperforming your own past. There is something else hidden inside this rule. Peterson says that if your life is not going well, perhaps it's not the world that's the problem. Perhaps it's your values. Perhaps what you want, what you think you want, is actually blinding you to what you need. The person who fixates on getting their boss's job might be making themselves miserable for years over something that wouldn't even satisfy them if they got it. But as long as they keep wanting it, they can't see anything else. So sometimes the answer is not to try harder at the same game. Sometimes the answer is to change the game entirely, to let go of what you thought you wanted and open yourself to the possibility that something better exists, something you couldn't see before, because your old ambition was standing in the way. Aim small. Aim at something you could do, would do, and will do today. Let the critic inside you become a collaborator instead of an executioner. Stop measuring your interior against everyone else's exterior and pay attention to where you actually are right now so you can figure out where to go next. What you aim at determines what you see. Aim carefully, aim upward, and compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who someone else is today. Rule 5. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Picture a crowded airport terminal. Hundreds of travelers, exhausted, dragging their luggage, trying to get where they need to be, and trailing behind two parents. There's a 3-year-old boy. He's screaming, not crying, screaming, deliberately, at 5-second intervals. Controlled bursts of maximum volume, calculated for maximum impact. Peterson watched this scene unfold. As a parent and a psychologist, he could tell from the tone. This child wasn't at the end of his rope. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't frightened. He was testing. He was seeing what he could get away with. And his parents did nothing. Maybe they were tired. Maybe they were jet-lagged. Maybe they'd given up. But Peterson's point is sharp. 30 seconds of carefully directed intervention would have ended it. Instead, they let their child become the object of an entire crowd's contempt. And that is not love. That is neglect disguised as tolerance. He describes another scene. A couple unable to say no to their 2-year-old who misbehaved so badly whenever he was unsupervised that they had to follow him everywhere, every second, every room, hovering an arm's length behind him for the duration of what was supposed to be a pleasant social visit. They thought they were giving him freedom by refusing to correct him. In reality, they had stripped him of every opportunity for genuine independence because he had never learned what no meant. He had no sense of where the boundaries were. And without boundaries, there is no safe territory to explore. This is one of Peterson's most provocative and most misunderstood rules. He is not advocating for authoritarian parenting. He is not saying you should dominate or crush your children's spirit. He is saying something far more nuanced and far more important, that parents who refuse to discipline their children are not being kind. They are being cowardly, and the price of that cowardice is paid entirely by the child. Here is the logic. Your child is going to be socialized, disciplined, corrected, taught the rules, one way or another. Either you do it with love and care and attention to their long-term well-being, or the world does it, harshly and without mercy. The playground will do it. The classroom will do it. The peer group will do it. And later, the workplace, the legal system, and the cold indifference of strangers will do it. A parent who says, "I don't want to be the bad guy," is not sparing their child from correction. They are simply handing that job to someone who doesn't love the child at all. Peterson tells one of the most quietly devastating stories in the entire book. A 4-year-old boy had been showing up at his house through a neighborhood babysitting arrangement. The child's mother had told them he wouldn't eat. "That's okay," she said. It was not okay. The boy was withdrawn. He wouldn't play with the other children. He wouldn't make eye contact. He stood in corners, voluntarily, unhappily. When Peterson's wife, Tammy, sat him down at the table with the other kids and put food in front of him, he clamped his mouth shut. He turned his head away. He resisted with the stubborn defensive techniques of a much younger child, a child who had learned that food, attention, and care were not things he could count on. But Tammy wouldn't let him fail. She was patient. She was persistent. She waited with the spoon. She patted his head every time he managed a mouthful and told him he was a good boy. She meant it. He was a good boy. He was a cute, damaged kid who had simply never been shown that the world could be relied upon to feed him. 10 minutes later, he finished his meal. Tammy held up his empty bowl. "Look," she said, "you finished all of it." And this child, this boy, who had been standing alone in corners, who had refused to play, who had frowned at every offered hand, broke into a wide, radiant smile. It transformed his entire face. Everyone at the table saw it. 20 years later, Peterson writes, the memory still brings him to tears. The boy followed Tammy around like a shadow for the rest of the day. He wouldn't let her out of his sight. He curled up in her lap and opened himself back up to the world. He was searching desperately for the love and structure he had been denied. Then his mother came to pick him up. She walked down the stairs, saw her son in Tammy's lap, and said, flatly, resentfully, "Oh, Supermom," and she left, black heart unchanged, doomed child in hand. She was a psychologist. Peterson uses this story not to condemn that particular mother, but to illustrate something universal and deeply uncomfortable. Children need structure. They need limits. They need to be taught how to behave, not because adults are tyrants, but because the world is brutal to people who never learned the rules. A 3-year-old who bites and hits and takes other children's toys is doing what comes naturally. Aggression is innate. It doesn't have to be taught. 2-year-olds are statistically the most violent humans on the planet. They kick, bite, and steal because they're exploring the world and testing its limits. That is normal and healthy, but it must be met with correction, or it doesn't go away. It just becomes more sophisticated. The research is clear, and Peterson states it directly. If a child has not been properly socialized by the age of 4, it will be very difficult for other children to tolerate them. They will be rejected by their peers, and once rejected, they lose access to the very social interactions that would have helped them mature. They fall behind, and they keep falling. The unsocialized child becomes the lonely teenager, becomes the bitter, isolated adult, not because they were evil, but because no one cared enough or was brave enough to teach them how the world works. So how do you actually do this? How do you discipline a child without becoming a tyrant? Peterson lays out a handful of practical principles. First, limit the rules. Don't bury your child under 100 regulations. Pick the ones that matter most. Don't bite, kick, or hit. Eat properly. Share. Pay attention when adults are speaking. Go to bed without a war. Be good company. Act so that other people are happy you're around. A child who follows these rules will be welcome everywhere, and being welcome everywhere is one of the greatest gifts you can give a human being. Second, use the minimum necessary force. Start with a glance. Move to a word. Use whatever is the least intervention that actually works. Some children will be stopped cold by a disapproving look. Others need firmer measures. The point is not to overreact. The point is to find the smallest effective response and apply it consistently. Third, parents should come in pairs whenever possible. Not because single parents can't do an extraordinary job. Many do, often heroically. But because raising children is exhausting, and an exhausted parent is a dangerous parent. Not physically dangerous, necessarily, but emotionally dangerous. A parent who is worn out, resentful, and unsupported will eventually snap, not in the moment of misbehavior, but later, unpredictably, over something unrelated. The child will be punished not for what they did, but for the accumulated frustration the parent never dealt with. That's far worse than a clear, immediate, proportionate correction delivered in the moment. And fourth, know yourself. Understand your own capacity for cruelty, pettiness, and revenge. Because if you pretend those things don't live inside you, they will express themselves without your awareness or control. The parent who never sets limits isn't avoiding cruelty. They're storing it up. They're building an invisible reservoir of resentment that will eventually overflow in ways far more damaging than any timeout or firm word ever could. Here is the bottom line. If your child's behavior makes you dislike them, if you feel that flicker of irritation, that subtle withdrawal of warmth, then something needs to be addressed. Not because your feelings are always right, but because if you, the person who loves this child most in the world, are starting to recoil, imagine how everyone else feels. Imagine how their teachers feel, their classmates, the parents of their friends. You love your children, so discipline them. Not with rage, not with cruelty, but with the honest, difficult, patient attention that genuine care requires. Teach them the rules of the world before the world teaches them in ways you cannot control. That is not oppression. That is the deepest form of love. Do not let your children do anything that makes you dislike them. Rule 6. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. In December 2012, a young man walked into Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, and murdered 20 children and 6 staff members. In 1999, 2 teenagers walked into Columbine High School in Colorado and opened fire on their classmates. In the years between and since, mass killings have occurred with a regularity that defies comprehension. Everyone says the same thing afterward. We don't understand. How could someone do this? What went wrong? Peterson says, we do understand. We just don't want to admit it. One of the Columbine killers kept a journal. In it he wrote, with chilling clarity, exactly what he believed and why he intended to act on it. The human race isn't worth fighting for, he wrote, only worth killing. Give the earth back to the animals. They deserve it infinitely more than we do. Nothing means anything anymore. This is not madness in the way we typically imagine madness. Chaotic, incoherent, disconnected from reality. This is something far more dangerous. It is a logical conclusion drawn from a particular set of premises. The premises are these. Life is suffering. The suffering is unjust. The world is fundamentally flawed. Human beings are the source of the flaw. Therefore, human beings, and perhaps being itself, should be destroyed. Peterson takes these thoughts with extreme seriousness. He does not dismiss them as the ravings of a disturbed mind. He treats them as a philosophical position, a dark and terrible one, but a position nonetheless. And he does this because he recognizes that the same line of reasoning, in milder form, lives inside almost everyone. You don't have to be a mass murderer to look at the world and feel that something is deeply, fundamentally wrong. You don't have to be insane to wonder whether existence itself might be a cruel joke. The great Russian novelist Leo Tolstoy, one of the finest minds of the 19th century, at the peak of his fame and creative power, descended into exactly this kind of despair. He concluded that there were only 4 responses to the horror of existence: retreat into childlike ignorance, pursue mindless pleasure, drag yourself forward despite knowing that life is meaningless, or end it. Picture this man, wealthy, famous, beloved by millions of readers around the world, walking through his own estate, past his own library, past shelves full of books he himself had written, and deliberately avoiding the room where his hunting rifles were stored. Tolstoy hid his guns from himself. He refused to walk near ropes. He was afraid of his own conclusions. So this is not a small question. This is the question. If suffering is real, if cruelty is real, if the innocent are punished and the guilty go free, then how can any honest person refrain from cursing the world and everything in it? Peterson's answer comes from an unexpected place. He turns to the story of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Solzhenitsyn was a Russian soldier during the Second World War. He served on the front lines against the Nazi invasion, already a nightmare by any standard. Then he was arrested by his own government. The Soviet secret police intercepted a letter he had written that contained a mild criticism of Stalin. He was beaten, interrogated, and sentenced to 8 years in the labor camps of the Gulag, the vast Soviet prison system where millions suffered and died. In the camps, he endured conditions almost beyond description: forced labor in freezing temperatures, starvation rations, brutality from guards and fellow prisoners alike. Years of his life stolen, his family gone, his career destroyed. And then, as if all of that were not enough, he was diagnosed with cancer. This is the point at which most people would break. This is the point at which resentment, bitterness, and the desire for revenge become entirely understandable, maybe even justified. Solzhenitsyn had every reason to hate. He had every reason to blame. He had every reason to conclude that the universe was fundamentally malevolent, and that the only rational response was despair. But he didn't. Instead, he did something almost incomprehensible. He turned the examination inward. He asked himself, not the world, not God, not the Soviet state, but himself, what did I do wrong? How did I contribute to this catastrophe? He thought back over his life with painful honesty. He remembered his early, unquestioning support of the Communist Party. He remembered the times he had acted against his own conscience. He remembered the small lies, the moral shortcuts, the moments when he had known what was right and chosen what was easy instead. And he took responsibility, not for everything, not for the whole monstrous apparatus of Soviet tyranny, but for his part, for the ways he had personally participated, through silence, through compliance, through cowardice, in the system that had eventually consumed him. That decision changed everything. It gave him something that pure victimhood never could: agency. If the fault was entirely external, if the world was simply and purely evil, then there was nothing to be done. He was trapped. But if some portion of the fault was his, then some portion of the solution was also his. He could change. He could stop lying. He could stop making things worse, and he could start, one careful, honest action at a time, making things better. Solzhenitsyn rebuilt himself in the Gulag. He emerged from those camps, not destroyed, but transformed. And then he wrote. He spent decades composing the Gulag Archipelago, a massive, meticulously documented account of the Soviet prison system, its history, its mechanisms, and the millions of lives it devoured. That book, smuggled out of the Soviet Union, read in secret, broadcast by radio back into the country that had tried to silence its author, did something that seemed impossible. It destroyed the intellectual credibility of communism. It wasn't guns or armies that brought the Soviet system to its knees. It was one man telling the truth about what he had seen and what he had done. Peterson also describes a man he knew personally, a native artist who had endured an almost equally terrible childhood, taken from his family at age 5, thrown into a residential school, unable to speak the language, isolated, starved, abused. He emerged as a young man shattered by rage and self-destruction, alcohol, drugs, hatred for everyone, God, humanity, and himself included. But he stopped. He chose to stop. He quit drinking. He revived the artistic traditions of his people. He trained young men to carry them forward. He built a 50-foot totem pole memorializing the events of his life. He carved a 40-foot canoe from a single log. He gathered his family, held a great potlatch, 16 hours of dancing, hundreds of people in attendance, to grieve what had been done to him and to make peace with it. He decided to be a good person, and then he did the impossible, grueling work required to live that way. These are not fairy tales. These are real people who faced real horrors and chose transformation over revenge. They did not deny their suffering. They did not minimize what had been done to them, but they also did not allow that suffering to become the foundation of a philosophy of destruction. And that is what Peterson is asking of you with this rule. Not that you save the world, not that you fix everything, but that you start with yourself. Have you taken full advantage of the opportunities available to you? Are you working as hard as you could at your job, your relationships, your health? Have you said the things that need to be said to the people who need to hear them? Have you stopped doing the things you know are wrong, even the small things, the private things, the things nobody else can see? Don't blame capitalism. Don't blame the system. Don't blame your enemies. Not yet, not first. Start with yourself. Start with what you can control. Clean your room. Peterson means this literally, but he also means it as a metaphor for every neglected corner of your existence. Fix what's broken. Organize what's chaotic. Tell the truth about what you've been avoiding, because here is the terrible and liberating reality. If some of the fault is yours, then some of the power is yours too. If you are contributing to the suffering in your life, even slightly, even unconsciously, then you have the ability to stop. And if you can stop making things worse, you can start, slowly, carefully, making things better. And if enough people did that, if enough people set their own houses in order before they tried to reorganize the world itself might begin to change. You cannot fix what you will not face. You cannot improve what you refuse to examine. Start where you are. Start with what you know is wrong. Start today. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Key takeaways. We've covered a lot of ground. 6 rules. 6 different angles on the same fundamental challenge. How to live a life that's strong enough to bear the weight of its own suffering. Let's walk through them one more time. Not as a summary, but as a single thread. Because these rules are not a random collection. They build on each other. Each one leads to the next. And together they form something much larger than any individual piece. It starts with biology. Rule 1. You are an ancient creature running on neurochemistry that is 350 million years old. The dominance hierarchy is not a modern invention. It is not a social construct. It is woven into the deepest architecture of your nervous system. Your posture, your confidence, your willingness to stand your ground. These are not cosmetic details. They are signals. They tell the world, and they tell your own brain, whether you intend to engage with life or shrink from it. Stand up, shoulders back. That's the first step. It changes the feedback loop between your body and your mind, between your mind and the world. But standing up is not enough if you're neglecting the person who's doing the standing. That's rule 2. You treat yourself worse than you treat your dog, and there's a reason for that. You know yourself too well. You know every failure, every lie, every act of cowardice, and some part of you has concluded that you don't deserve care. Peterson says that conclusion is understandable, but wrong. You are flawed, yes, but you are also capable of extraordinary endurance, compassion, and courage. You matter. Treat yourself like it. Once you're taking care of yourself, you need to look at who you've surrounded yourself with. Rule 3. Your friends are not neutral forces in your life. They are either pulling you upward or dragging you down. If the people around you tolerate your worst behaviors and never challenge you to be better, they are not your friends. They are your accomplices. Choose people who want things to improve. Choose people who will celebrate your victories and confront your failures. Choose people whose lives would get better if yours did. With the right people around you, you can stop playing the comparison game that has been poisoning your self-worth. Rule 4. You are not competing against the entire world. You are competing against yourself. Yesterday's version of yourself. Aim small. Aim precisely. Fix one thing today that was broken yesterday. Do that consistently, and the compound interest will transform your life in ways you can barely imagine. And if you have children, your responsibility extends beyond yourself. Rule 5. Your children need discipline, not punishment delivered in anger, but structure provided with love. If you won't set limits, the world will, and the world is far less merciful than a caring parent. Teach them the rules. Teach them young. Give them the gift of being welcome wherever they go. Finally, Rule 6. Before you criticize the world, look at your own life. Before you blame the system, ask yourself whether you've done everything within your power to make your own situation better. Start with what you can control. Stop doing the things you know are wrong. Tell the truth. Clean up the mess. Set your house in order. These 6 rules are not soft suggestions. They are the foundation. Stand up. Take care of yourself. Choose your friends wisely. Measure yourself against your own past. Discipline your children with love, and get your own life together before you try to fix anyone else's. That's the ground floor. That's where the real work begins. And the real work, the deep work, the hard work, the work that touches the meaning of existence itself. That's what comes next. Closing. We started this video on the ocean floor with a lobster, an ancient creature that has been fighting for its place in the world since before trees existed. And we end it with a question that might seem much simpler, but is actually much harder. Can you look at your own life, honestly, without flinching, and take responsibility for what you find there? Can you stop blaming everyone else long enough to notice the things you could fix, the changes you could make, the lies you could stop telling? Not because the world is fair. It's not. Not because your suffering doesn't matter. It does. But because waiting for the world to improve while you refuse to improve yourself is a recipe for bitterness that ends only one way. These first 6 rules are the foundation Peterson builds his entire philosophy on. Stand up, take care of yourself, choose the right people, aim carefully, raise your children well, clean up your own mess. But once the foundation is set, once the house is in order, a much bigger question emerges. If life is suffering, and if you've accepted responsibility for your own corner of that suffering, then what is the point? What makes all of this worth it? What is the difference between a life of mere survival and a life of genuine meaning? That's what the next 6 rules are about. Sacrifice, truth, listening, precision, courage, and the small, startling moments of beauty that can sustain you even when everything else has fallen apart. Part 2 is on the channel now. I'll see you there. If you found value in this video, do me a favor, drop a comment, and tell me which of these 6 rules hit you the hardest. I read every one of them, and if you want to go deeper into this book, I've left a link in the description to grab your own copy on Amazon or Audible. Sometimes a book doesn't just change how you think, it changes how you stand. This might be one of those books. Hit subscribe, we've got a lot more to cover, and every book might be the one that changes everything. There's a question that visits almost everyone eventually. It usually arrives at 3 in the morning or in the quiet after something terrible has happened. The question is this: if life contains this much suffering, if pain is guaranteed, if loss is inevitable, if the people you love most can be taken from you without warning, then what is the point? Why not just do whatever feels good right now and forget about tomorrow? Why sacrifice anything? Why delay any pleasure? Why bother being honest when lying is easier? Why play by the rules when the rules don't seem to care about you? It's an honest question, maybe the most honest question a person can ask. And yet the answer, the real answer, is not what you'd expect. It's not be happy. It's not think positive. It's not some bumper sticker about gratitude or living your best life. It's something far more demanding, far more ancient, and far more powerful. It begins with a single word: meaning. This is 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson, Part 2. In Part 1, we laid the foundation. We started with biology, the 350-million-year-old serotonin system you share with lobsters. We talked about why you neglect yourself, why your friends matter more than you think, why comparison is a trap, why your children need discipline, and why you must set your own house in order before you dare criticize the world. Those were the ground floor rules, the structural beams, the things you need to get right before anything else can stand. Now we go deeper. The next 6 rules take on the questions that haunt people even after they've gotten the basics in order. What makes suffering bearable? What happens when you build your life on lies? How do you listen, really listen, to another human being? What falls apart when you refuse to say what you mean? Why is danger sometimes exactly what a young person needs? And how do you find beauty in a world that seems determined to break your heart? Over the next hour, I'll walk you through Rules 7 through 12. We'll start with the oldest question in human history: why sacrifice? And we'll end with a sick child, a stray cat, and the smallest possible reason to keep going. Let's begin. Rule 7. Pursue what is meaningful, not what is expedient. Somewhere in the ancient world, long before written history, a human being made a discovery that would change everything. It wasn't fire, it wasn't the wheel, it was something far more abstract and far more powerful. The discovery was this: if you give something up now, Something better might come later. That sounds obvious. It's not. Think about what it actually requires. Every animal instinct you possess screams at you to consume, to take, to satisfy the urge immediately. You're hungry, eat. You're tired, sleep. You see something you want, grab it. That's what every other creature on the planet does. And it's what your deepest wiring is designed for. The idea that you could voluntarily forego a pleasure in the present and receive something better in the future. That idea had to be invented or discovered. It is not instinct. It is in some sense the opposite of instinct. It is the first genuinely human act. Peterson traces this discovery through the oldest stories we have. In the biblical tradition, it shows up immediately after the fall, after Adam and Eve are expelled from paradise and must, for the first time, work for their survival. Their sons, Cain and Abel, are the first humans born in the normal way, outside of Eden, into the world of history and suffering, and both of them learn to make sacrifices to God. Abel is a shepherd. Cain is a farmer. Both bring offerings. Abel brings the best of his flock, the firstborn, the choicest portions. He holds nothing back. His sacrifice is genuine, and God accepts it. Abel prospers. His crops grow. His life unfolds with something resembling grace. Cain also sacrifices, but something is off. The text doesn't say exactly what's wrong, but the implication is clear. Cain's heart isn't in it. He's going through the motions. He's offering something, but not the best thing, not the thing that costs him. And God rejects his sacrifice. Now imagine how that feels. You've done what you were supposed to do, or at least you thought you did. You've worked hard, or hard enough. You made your offering, and it wasn't accepted. Meanwhile, your brother, your younger brother, is thriving. Everyone can see it. He didn't do anything you didn't do. Or did he? Was his sacrifice better than yours? Was he more sincere? More willing to give up what mattered? Cain becomes bitter. He confronts God, and God's response is not comforting. God tells Cain, essentially, the fault is yours. You know what you did wrong. You know you cut corners. You know you held back the best for yourself and offered the leftovers. And worse, you did it knowingly. You dallied with sin. You invited this on yourself. This is not what Cain wants to hear. He wanted sympathy. He wanted God to acknowledge that life is unfair. Instead, he gets a mirror held up to his face, and what he sees there enrages him. So Cain does the unthinkable. He murders Abel, his own brother, the best person he knows, the person everyone admires. He doesn't kill him in a moment of passion. He plots it. He lures Abel into a field and strikes him down deliberately. And this is what makes the story so terrifying. Because Cain doesn't kill Abel despite Abel's goodness. He kills Abel because of it. Abel's virtue is a living, breathing reminder of everything Cain refused to do. Every time Cain looks at his brother, he sees the sacrifice he wasn't willing to make. And rather than make that sacrifice, rather than change, rather than humble himself, he destroys the evidence. He murders the ideal. Peterson reads this not just as a story about jealousy between brothers. He reads it as the foundational story of human evil. The pattern it describes plays out endlessly. In families, in workplaces, in politics, in history, someone fails. Instead of examining why they failed, they blame the person who succeeded. Instead of making a better sacrifice, they tear down the altar. Instead of reaching for what is meaningful, they reach for what is expedient. And when expedience fails, they reach for revenge. So what is the alternative? If life is suffering, and if the easy path, the expedient path, the path of grabbing what you want right now, leads eventually to Cain's bitter rage, then what is the harder path, and where does it lead? Peterson takes this question to its absolute extreme. He turns to the story of Christ's temptation in the desert, not as a Sunday school lesson, but as a psychological drama about the deepest possible confrontation between good and evil within a single mind. The story goes like this. Jesus has been fasting in the wilderness for 40 days. He is starving, exhausted, alone, and vulnerable. Satan appears and offers him 3 temptations. The first, turn these stones into bread. You're hungry. You have the power. Use it. Feed yourself. What's the harm? Christ's answer is strange and profound. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. What does that mean? It means that even in extreme privation, there is something more important than satisfying the immediate need. Bread solves today's hunger, but a life organized around always getting bread, around always taking the shortcut, always satisfying the craving, always choosing what's easy over what's right, that life has no foundation. You eat and you're hungry again tomorrow. If all you ever do is chase the next meal, the next pleasure, the next quick fix, you never build anything that lasts. The second temptation, throw yourself from this cliff. If God exists, He'll send angels to save you. Prove it. Force His hand. Christ refuses. He will not demand that reality rearrange itself for His personal benefit. He will not treat God as a safety net or a magic trick. He accepts the rules of the game. He accepts that he must navigate the world as it is, not as he wishes it were. And then comes the third temptation, the most seductive of all. Satan shows Christ all the kingdoms of the world spread out before him, all the power, all the wealth, all the glory. Bow to me, Satan says, and all of this is yours. This is the temptation of earthly power, the chance to control everything and everyone, the chance to impose your will on reality by force. And Christ rejects it, not because power is useless, not because the kingdoms aren't real, but because there is something above power. There is something above the pinnacle of every dominance hierarchy. And that something is the voluntary commitment to truth and meaning, even when, especially when, it costs you everything. Now, you don't have to be Christian to understand what this story is saying. You don't have to believe in the literal existence of Satan or the divinity of Christ. The psychological insight is universal. Every human being faces these 3 temptations every single day. The temptation to satisfy the immediate craving at the expense of the future. The temptation to demand that reality bend to your wishes instead of adapting to reality as it is. And the temptation to seize power and control rather than earn your place through genuine contribution. Expediency is the path that follows all 3 temptations. It says, take what you can get right now and don't worry about the cost. It's the path of the liar who manipulates the present to avoid short-term discomfort. It's the path of the addict who sacrifices the future for a hit of pleasure today. It's the path of the cynic who has decided that nothing matters and therefore anything goes. Meaning is the opposite of expediency. Meaning is what you experience when you are doing something that simultaneously serves you in the present, strengthens you for the future, and benefits the people around you. It's not happiness. Happiness is fleeting and circumstantial. Meaning is deeper. It's the sense that what you are doing matters, that you are where you should be, that the structure of your life is aligned with something real and important. Peterson writes that you can detect meaning. You can feel it. It's not something you have to manufacture through willpower or positive thinking. When you are acting properly, when your actions serve your present self and your future self and your family and your community, all at the same time, something clicks into place. The anxiety recedes. The world starts cooperating, not because you wished it into compliance, but because you stopped working against it. Think of the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates. At the end of his life, he was put on trial by the city of Athens. He was accused of corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. His friends offered to help him escape. He could have fled. He could have chosen expediency, saved his own skin, lived a few more years in comfortable exile. But Socrates had spent his entire life pursuing truth. He had built his identity on the refusal to deceive himself or others. And so, When the moment of ultimate testing arrived, he could not abandon that commitment without destroying everything he was. He accepted the verdict. He drank the poison. He died with his integrity intact. 2,500 years later, we still remember him. We still tell his story. We still draw strength from his example. That is the power of meaning over expediency. Expedience is forgotten the moment it's consumed. Meaning endures. So what does this rule ask of you? Nothing small. It asks you to stop doing what is merely easy and start doing what is genuinely important. It asks you to make real sacrifices, to give up pleasures and comforts and shortcuts in the service of something larger than your immediate desires. It asks you to orient your life, not toward what feels good right now, but toward what would make things better, truly better, for you and for everyone around you, across time. That's the antidote to the 3 a.m. despair. Not happiness, not comfort, not distraction, meaning. A life organized around genuine sacrifice and honest engagement with the world's difficulty. A life where you carry your share of the weight, voluntarily, with your eyes open, and find, against all expectation, that the burden itself gives you the strength to bear it. Do what is meaningful, not what is expedient. The difference between those two choices is the difference between a life that matters and a life that merely passes. Rule 8. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Early in his career, Peterson had a strange and unsettling experience. He began paying close attention to the things he said, not just the big statements, but the small ones, the throwaway comments, the casual opinions, the stories he told at parties, and he made a disturbing discovery. Almost everything he said was untrue. Not untrue in the sense of deliberate, calculated deception. Untrue in a subtler, more insidious way. He was using words to win arguments, to impress people, to gain status, to avoid responsibility, to bend conversations toward outcomes he wanted. He was performing, not communicating. He was crafting sentences designed to produce a specific effect on his audience, rather than to express what he actually thought or felt. Once he noticed this, he couldn't unnotice it. He started to divide himself into 2 parts, one that spoke and one that watched. The watching part would evaluate what the speaking part was saying and flag the deceptions, the exaggerations, the strategic omissions. And the more he watched, the more he found. So he made a decision. He would stop saying things that the watching part of his mind objected to. He would practice telling the truth, or at the very least, he would stop lying. And he discovered something remarkable. When he didn't know what to do, when the situation was ambiguous and confusing, and no clear path presented itself, telling the truth worked. It cut through the noise. It simplified the situation. It wasn't always comfortable, and it didn't always produce the outcome he would have preferred in the moment, but it produced outcomes he could live with, outcomes he could build on. This principle was tested under some extraordinary conditions. Peterson once had a client who was paranoid, clinically, dangerously paranoid. Paranoid people are among the most difficult to work with because their condition makes them almost supernaturally sensitive to dishonesty. They can detect the faintest whiff of insincerity, mixed motive, or concealed judgment. They read micro-expressions, body language, and vocal inflections with an intensity that borders on the uncanny. They make mistakes in interpretation. That's the paranoia. But they miss almost nothing. This client would sometimes describe blood-curdling fantasies of violence and revenge. Peterson listened carefully and told the client honestly what those descriptions made him feel, not what he thought the client wanted to hear, not a clinical platitude. The truth that he was frightened, that the behavior being described was dangerous and misguided, that there would be serious consequences if the client acted on his impulses. The client kept coming back, not because Peterson was encouraging or reassuring, he wasn't, but because Peterson was honest. And a paranoid person, more than almost anyone, need someone who will tell them the truth. They already know that most people are performing. They already suspect that the smiles are fake and the reassurances are hollow. When they encounter someone who is not pretending, someone whose reactions are genuine and transparent, they recognize it immediately and they trust it, precisely because it's uncomfortable. But the principle extends far beyond the therapy room. Peterson also had a landlord, a former president of a local biker gang. Denise was a big, strong French-Canadian who was trying to stay sober after a stint in jail. He was a talented electrician and a capable artist. He was also an alcoholic with a terrifying capacity to consume alcohol, 50 or 60 beers in a single binge, and still standing at the end. Every month or so, Denis would vanish on a bender. When the money ran out, he'd show up at Peterson's apartment door, swaying on his feet, holding some possession he wanted to sell, a toaster, a microwave, a poster, so he could buy more to drink. Peterson bought a few things at first. Then his wife, Tammy, told him he had to stop. It was bad for Denis, and it was making her nervous. So the next time Denise knocked, 2 in the morning, visibly intoxicated, toaster in hand, Peterson had to say no, and he had to do it carefully. This was not a man you lied to. This was not a man you condescended to. Denise had spent his life in environments where any hint of dishonesty or superiority would be met with immediate and potentially violent consequences. Peterson stripped away every trace of moral superiority from his mind. He wasn't a privileged, educated man talking down to a struggling ex-convict. He was one person trying to do the right thing for another. He told Denise, simply and directly, that Denise himself had said he was trying to quit drinking, that giving him money for more alcohol would not be good for him, that showing up this late, this drunk, made Tammy uncomfortable, and that Tammy cared about him. Denise stared at Peterson for about 15 seconds without speaking. 15 seconds is a very long time when a large, intoxicated former biker gang president is evaluating whether you're telling the truth. He was scanning for sarcasm, for contempt, for self-congratulation, for any micro-expression that would reveal the words as a performance. He found nothing, because there was nothing to find. Peterson had thought it through carefully and had said only things he truly meant. Denise turned and left. He remembered the conversation the next day. Despite his staggering level of intoxication, he never tried to sell Peterson anything again, and their relationship, already good given the enormous cultural gap between them, became even stronger. That's what happens when you tell the truth. Not always, not in every case. Sometimes the truth produces conflict. Sometimes it costs you a friendship, a job, a comfortable arrangement you've grown accustomed to. But the truth creates something that lies never can, a foundation you can actually stand on. A lie might get you through the afternoon, but it weakens the ground beneath your feet. Every lie requires another lie to support it. Every deception requires more deception to maintain. The structure grows more elaborate and more fragile, until eventually the whole thing collapses under its own weight. Peterson draws a direct line between personal dishonesty and the great catastrophes of the 20th century. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, whose story we explored in Part 1, made this argument with devastating clarity. The Soviet system was sustained not by force alone, but by lies. Millions of small, daily personal lies told by ordinary citizens who knew better but said nothing. They lied to their neighbors. They lied to their colleagues. They lied to themselves. Each individual lie seemed insignificant, but together they formed the atmosphere in which tyranny could breathe. The Gulag did not begin with prison camps. It began with people deciding that it was easier to say what was expected than to say what was true. Peterson is not asking you to be recklessly, brutally honest, to weaponize truth as a bludgeon. He's asking something more nuanced. He's saying, at minimum, stop lying. Pay attention to the things you say. Notice when you're performing instead of communicating. Notice when you're crafting your words to manipulate an outcome rather than to express what you actually think. And when you catch yourself doing that, stop. You might ask, But what if I don't know what the truth is? What if the situation is complicated and I can't see clearly? Peterson's answer is precise. You might not always know what is true. The world is complex and your understanding is limited, but you almost always know when you're lying. You can feel it, a subtle internal sensation of division, a sinking, a discomfort that tells you the words coming out of your mouth don't match what you actually believe. Start there. Start by not saying the things that make you feel weak. If you tell the truth, or at least stop lying, your life will simplify. Not immediately, not painlessly, but gradually, the chaos will recede. The relationships that survive your honesty will be the ones worth keeping. The goals that remain after you stop deceiving yourself about what you want will be the ones worth pursuing. The person who emerges from the process will be someone you can actually respect. Set your ambitions, aim high, but subordinate all of it to a single meta goal. Live in truth. Act diligently toward your chosen end, but let the world and your spirit unfold as they will. Pay attention, note your errors, correct them, and do not, above all, lie. Not to others and not to yourself, because lies corrupt the soul, they corrupt the state, and they transform the world, one small deception at a time, into something no one would willingly inhabit. Tell the truth, or at least don't lie. Rule 9. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Peterson once had a client, we'll call her Miss S, who arrived at his office one day and announced, "I think I was raped." That's a difficult sentence to hear under any circumstances, but she followed it with something that made the situation almost incomprehensible. She added a detail, 5 times. 5 times. What could that possibly mean? The full picture emerged slowly. Miss S would go to a bar, have a few drinks, meet someone, go home with him. The next morning she would wake up uncertain about everything, about what had happened, about her own motives, about his motives, about the nature of reality itself. Miss S was, in Peterson's words, a ghost of a person. She had no self to speak of. Her parents had provided her with essentially zero attention. Her brothers had been cruel. She had no friends, no real job, no partner, and no framework for understanding her own experience. She once brought Peterson her resume. It was 50 pages long, in a file folder box with tab dividers. The sections included my dreams and books I have read. This was what she proposed to send to prospective employers. 50 pages, including a section of nighttime dreams. It is almost impossible to grasp how lost a person has to be for that to seem like a reasonable document to send into the world. Peterson sat with her question, "Was I raped?" and faced a choice. He could have answered it for her. He knew enough about ideology, about the frameworks available to a clinical psychologist, to construct a neat, clean narrative in either direction. If he leaned left, he could tell her she was unambiguously a victim, that her partners had a legal and moral obligation to ensure she was capable of consenting, that her doubt was itself evidence of how thoroughly she had been victimized. She would have accepted that story. She would have remembered it for the rest of her life. It would have given her a self, a victim self, but a self nonetheless. If he leaned right, he could tell her she was a walking disaster, that she wandered into bars with no awareness, no boundaries, and no sense of personal responsibility, that she needed to wake up and take control of her own behavior. She would have accepted that story too. It also would have given her a self, a guilty self, a shamed self, but a self. Either narrative would have been partially true, and either one would have foreclosed all the other possible truths, the messy, complicated, contradictory truths that couldn't be captured by any single ideology. So Peterson did something much harder than providing an answer. He listened, and this is where the rule reveals its depth. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. That sounds like advice about being polite in conversation, doesn't it? But it's not. It's a statement about the fundamental nature of thinking itself. People think they think, but most of what passes for thinking is actually internal monologue, rehashing old positions, rehearsing arguments, replaying grievances. Real thinking is rare, and it's extraordinarily difficult, because real thinking requires you to be at least two people at the same time, one who speaks and one who listens and objects and corrects. You have to generate an idea and then immediately test it against the strongest possible counter-argument. You have to be willing to let your own position be defeated by a better one, and most people simply won't do that because it's painful. It means admitting you were wrong. It means watching a piece of yourself die. This is why conversation is so valuable. When you can't do that internal work alone, and most of us can't, most of the time, you need someone else to play the opposing role. You need someone to listen to what you're saying, reflect it back, and help you separate the wheat from the chaff. A listening person is not just being polite. A listening person is serving as a stand-in for the entire community, testing your ideas against the collective wisdom of everyone to see if they hold up. The great humanistic psychologist Carl Rogers understood this deeply. He once proposed a simple experiment. The next time you find yourself in a disagreement, he suggested, stop the discussion and institute a rule. Each person can speak only after they have first restated the ideas and feelings of the previous speaker accurately, and to that speaker's satisfaction. Sounds easy, it's not. Rogers himself acknowledged it was one of the most difficult things a person can attempt, because to restate someone else's position accurately, to genuinely understand what they're saying and why, you have to enter their world. You have to temporarily abandon your own certainty and see things from their perspective. And once you've done that, you might find that your own position has changed. That's the risk. That's why people avoid it. And that's precisely why it works. Peterson applies this in his clinical practice by summarizing what his clients tell him and asking if he got it right. Sometimes they accept his summary. Sometimes they offer a correction. Sometimes he's completely wrong. All of that is useful information. But the real benefit is subtler. When you summarize someone's experience accurately, you help them consolidate their own understanding. The jumbled, emotional, half-formed account becomes clearer and more manageable. The story shortens. The essential lessons emerge from the noise. The person begins to see their own situation with new eyes, not because you told them what to see, but because you helped them do the seeing for themselves. This is why Peterson chose to listen to Miss S rather than give her an answer. An answer would have shut down the process. It would have replaced her complicated, unresolved truth with someone else's simple, resolved ideology. She would have left his office with a story, but not with understanding. She needed to talk and to be heard, and to slowly, over weeks and months and years, discover for herself what had happened, what it meant, and what she wanted to do about it. There's another form of conversation Peterson describes that's worth understanding. The kind where both participants are genuinely exploring, not competing, not performing, not trying to win. Both people are engaged with a real problem. Both are willing to have their minds changed. Both are operating on the assumption that they don't yet know enough, and that the other person might hold a piece of the puzzle they're missing. You can tell when this kind of conversation is happening. It doesn't feel like an argument. It doesn't feel like a performance. It feels alive. Time disappears. Ideas emerge that neither person could have generated alone. You leave feeling that something real occurred, that you connected with another human being at a level deeper than small talk or debate. Peterson compares it to listening to great music. The patterns of predictability and unpredictability layer on top of each other, and meaning wells up from somewhere deep inside you. And then there are the other kinds of conversation, the ones most of us engage in most of the time, the kind where one person is speaking only to establish dominance, the kind where neither person is listening because both are busy rehearsing what they'll say next, the kind where someone is pushing an ideological position and treating every response as either confirmation or enemy action. These conversations are common. They are also nearly worthless. They produce nothing new. They change no minds. They solve no problems. They are at best elaborate forms of social positioning, and at worst, instruments of manipulation and control. Peterson's rule asks you to do something radical. It asks you to enter every conversation, especially the difficult ones, with the genuine belief that you have something to learn. Not as a tactic, not as a way to appear open-minded while secretly maintaining your position, but as an actual orientation toward reality. You don't know everything. Your current understanding, however sophisticated, is insufficient. The proof of that is simple. Your life is not perfect. If you knew everything you needed to know, it would be. Since it isn't, there's more to learn. And the person sitting across from you, even if they're confused or angry or inarticulate, might hold a piece of what you're missing. So listen, not passively, not politely. Listen as if your life depends on understanding what the other person is trying to say. Because, in ways you might not yet appreciate, it does. Assume that the person you are listening to might know something you don't. Rule 10. Be precise in your speech. There is a children's book called There's No Such Thing as a Dragon, written by Jack Kent. It's a very simple story on the surface, just a few pages long, but Peterson considers it one of the most profound illustrations of a psychological truth he's ever encountered. A small boy named Billy Bixby wakes up one morning and finds a dragon sitting on his bed. It's about the size of a house cat, friendly, not threatening at all. He tells his mother about it. She says, "There's no such thing as a dragon." So the dragon starts to grow. It eats all of Billy's pancakes. It gets bigger. It fills the bedroom. It fills the hallway. His mother tries to vacuum around it, climbing in and out of windows because the dragon is now taking up most of the house. She pretends it isn't there. It keeps growing. Eventually, the dragon is so large it picks up the entire house and runs off with it down the street. Billy's father comes home from work to find nothing but an empty lot where his home used to be. The mailman tells him where the house went. He chases after it, climbs up the dragon's enormous neck, and rejoins his family inside. The mother still insists the dragon doesn't exist, but Billy has had enough. "There is a dragon, Mom," he says. Instantly, the dragon starts to shrink. Within minutes, it's back to the size of a house cat. Everyone agrees that a cat-sized dragon is much preferable to one that carries off your house. The mother asks, a little sadly, why it had to get so big in the first place. Billy says, quietly, maybe it wanted to be noticed. That's the moral of the story, and it's the moral of more real-life catastrophes than most people would care to admit. Think about what happens in a marriage that's falling apart. It rarely collapses because of a single dramatic betrayal. It collapses because of 10,000 things that were never said. Small annoyances that were swallowed instead of addressed. Minor resentments that were filed away instead of discussed. Moments of disconnection that were papered over with polite silence. Each one was tiny. Each one was manageable. Each one, on its own, was not worth fighting about, but they accumulate. They don't disappear just because you refuse to look at them. They grow. They feed on your silence. And one day, something happens. An affair, a screaming argument over nothing, a cold announcement that it's over, and everyone is shocked. Everyone says they didn't see it coming, but the dragon was sitting on the bed the whole time. It just wasn't being acknowledged. Peterson paints a vivid picture of this process. Imagine a wife who slowly discovers her husband's growing inattention. The conversations at dinner become shorter. The evenings together become rarer. The physical intimacy fades from weekly to monthly to almost never. She notices. Of course she notices. But she tells herself it's fine. He's busy. She's tired. It's normal. It's not worth making a fuss about. Meanwhile, something is rotting underneath the surface. Her unspoken dissatisfaction turns to resentment. His unexamined withdrawal turns to contempt. Neither of them says anything because saying something would mean admitting that a problem exists, and admitting that a problem exists means confronting the terrifying possibility that the problem might be serious, that the marriage might be fragile, that the life they've built together might be standing on sand instead of rock. So they stay silent, and the dragon grows. And when it finally bursts through the walls, it's not a cat-sized inconvenience anymore. It's a catastrophe. Years of unprocessed conflict come flooding out at once. Every ignored slight, every swallowed complaint, every unspoken truth, and the resulting destruction is orders of magnitude worse than the small, honest, uncomfortable conversations that could have prevented it. This is what Peterson means by be precise in your speech. He's not talking about grammar. He's not talking about eloquence. He's talking about the willingness to name things, to identify what is wrong specifically and clearly before it metastasizes into something unmanageable. The world, Peterson argues, is not made up of objects. It's made up of tools and obstacles, things that help you get where you're going and things that get in the way. And most of the time, this simplified perception works fine. You don't need to understand the internal combustion engine to drive a car. You don't need to know how your laptop's processor works to send an email. The complexity is hidden, and as long as everything functions, you never notice it. But when something breaks, when the car won't start, when the relationship collapses, when your health fails, all that hidden complexity comes rushing to the surface. The world you thought you understood reveals itself as far more intricate and fragile than you imagined. And if you haven't been paying attention, if you've been sweeping problems under the rug, avoiding difficult conversations, refusing to name what's wrong, you will be overwhelmed. The chaos will be too much. You won't know where to start because you never bothered to define what was actually broken. Precision is the antidote to that overwhelm. If you wake up in pain and refuse to go to the doctor, the pain could be anything: cancer, heart disease, a pulled muscle. Your imagination will generate the worst possible scenarios, and you'll be haunted by all of them simultaneously. But if you go to the doctor and get a diagnosis, all those terrible possibilities collapse into one specific reality. Maybe it's serious, maybe it's not, but at least now you know what you're dealing with. At least now you can make a plan. The same principle applies to every area of your life. If your relationship is troubled, you need to identify the specific trouble. Not everything is wrong, but this particular thing is making me unhappy, and here is what I would like instead. If your career is stagnant, you need to name the specific obstacle. Not I hate my job, but I need more autonomy, or I need a new challenge, or I need to have a conversation with my boss about my role. Vagueness is the enemy. Vagueness keeps the dragon fed and growing. Peterson writes that every argument between partners that degenerates into chaos does so for the same reason. The topic isn't defined. One complaint leads to another, which triggers a counter-complaint, which dredges up something from 6 years ago, which escalates into an existential crisis about the entire relationship. Nobody can have a productive conversation about everything. You can only make progress on one specific, clearly defined problem at a time. So define the problem. Say what you mean, say what you want, say what you're unhappy about, specifically and directly, before the weight of everything unsaid crushes you and everyone around you. Don't hide things in the fog. Don't tell yourself it's not worth mentioning. Don't wait for the dragon to grow so large it carries your house away. You must determine where you have been in your life so that you can know where you are now. You must determine where you are going so that you can get there. And both of those tasks require language, clear, honest, precise language, the kind that cuts through ambiguity, the kind that turns formless dread into something you can actually confront. Confront the chaos of being. Specify your destination. Admit to what you want. Tell those around you who you are. Say what you mean so that you can find out what you mean. And then act it out so you can find out what happens. Be precise in your speech. Rule 11. Do not bother children when they are skateboarding. On the west side of Sydney Smith Hall at the University of Toronto, there used to be a set of rough, wide concrete steps leading up from the street to the front entrance. Alongside them ran tubular iron handrails, about 2.5 inches in diameter, 20 feet long, dropping at a steep angle toward the sidewalk. Almost every day, teenage boys would show up with their skateboards. They'd pull back about 15 yards from the top of the steps, plant a foot on their boards, and skate as hard as they could toward the railing. Just before impact, they'd reach down, grab the board, leap onto the top of the rail, and slide the entire length, board sliding it's called, before launching off the end and landing, sometimes on their boards, sometimes painfully off them. Either way, they were back at the top within minutes, ready to try again. Peterson watched them. He thought they were amazing. He thought they deserved admiration, not interference. It was dangerous, obviously. They could break an arm, crack a skull, shatter a wrist, but that was the point. They weren't trying to be safe. They were trying to become competent. And competence, real competence, the kind you earn by testing yourself against genuine risk, is what actually makes people safe in the long run. Then the skater stoppers appeared, little steel brackets, bolted every few feet along the railings and the edges of nearby concrete planters and sculpture bases. Ugly, industrial, hostile. They made the area look like a prison yard. The skateboarders vanished. Around the same time, Peterson noticed something similar happening across Toronto. 2 weeks before school started one autumn, all the playground equipment in the city disappeared. The safety regulations had changed. There was a panic about liability and insurance. The playgrounds were ripped out, even though they were safe enough, even though many had been recently installed and paid for by parents. For over a year, there were no playgrounds at all. Kids climbed on rooftops instead. When you make things too safe, people don't become safer. They become weaker. And then, when something genuinely dangerous comes along, as it inevitably will, they have no capacity to handle it. Children need playgrounds that are challenging enough to be interesting. They need an element of risk, because risk is how they learn to calibrate their own abilities. Take away all the risk, and you don't produce confident, capable human beings. You produce fragile, anxious ones who shatter at the first real contact with the unpredictable world. But there's something deeper going on in this rule than playground safety. Peterson is making an argument about the nature of courage, the importance of challenge, and what happens to a society that decides danger itself is the enemy. He tells a story from his own youth, a summer spent working on a railway line crew in central Saskatchewan. The crew was mostly men, many of them Northern Cree, tough guys who had been in and out of jail. When a new worker showed up, the others would immediately give him an insulting nickname. Peterson was christened Howdy Doody. He asked the man who named him why. "Because you look nothing like him," was the answer. This was a test. Everything on that crew was a test. The nicknames, the insults, the constant, relentless, often brutal humor. It was all designed to answer a single question. Can you handle it? Are you tough enough, reliable enough, and good-humored enough to be trusted when things get hard? Because on a railway line, in freezing temperatures, doing physically punishing work for hours on end, things do get hard, and the crew needed to know, before that happened, who could be counted on and who couldn't. One new hire, nicknamed Lunch Bucket, because he'd shown up with a conspicuously fancy lunchbox that looked like his mother had packed it, failed the test spectacularly. He complained about everything. He had a bad attitude. He was touchy and humorless. He couldn't take a joke, which on a work crew is a fatal flaw. After a few days of this, the harassment escalated. Pebbles started flying at his hard hat from anonymous positions along the quarter-mile line of workers. A well-aimed stone would produce a deeply satisfying thunk, followed by a burst of impotent fury from Lunch Bucket and quiet amusement from everyone else. The pebbles got larger. Lunch Bucket got angrier. He never adapted. He never laughed at himself. He never figured out the game. Within a week, he was gone. You might read that and think it sounds cruel. And maybe it was, in part. But it served a function. The crew was enforcing a code. Do your work. Pull your weight. Stay alert. Don't whine. Don't be touchy. Stand up for your friends. And above all, don't be a burden that everyone else has to carry. That code exists because the work is real, the conditions are harsh, and the consequences of weakness are borne by the entire group. Peterson connects this to a broader observation about boys and young men. Boys are, on average, more aggressive than girls, more competitive, more defiant, more interested in things than in people, more inclined to push boundaries and test authority. This is not a flaw to be corrected. It is a feature to be channeled. The aggression that makes a boy difficult at 13 is the same drive that makes a man productive and courageous at 30 if it's properly developed. If it isn't, if it's suppressed, shamed, or medicated into oblivion, the result is not a gentle, cooperative human being. The result is someone who is weak when strength is needed, someone who is passive when action is required, someone who has been denied the very experiences that would have taught him how to be competent. The boys on the skateboards were not being reckless. They were doing something that human beings, particularly young human beings, are wired to do. They were testing themselves against danger. They were learning through direct physical experience how much risk they could handle. They were developing coordination, courage, and the ability to recover from failure. Every fall taught them something. Every successful run built confidence that was earned, not handed to them. Peterson argues that a society that removes all risk from the lives of its young people is not protecting them, it is crippling them, and the consequences extend far beyond playgrounds and skate parks. When you tell young people that all competition is harmful, that all hierarchies are oppressive, that all aggressive impulses are toxic, that safety is the highest possible value, you are not preparing them for the world. You are setting them up to be destroyed by it, because the world is not safe. It has never been safe. It will never be safe. And the people who thrive in it are not the ones who were wrapped in bubble wrap and shielded from every sharp edge. They are the ones who were allowed to fall and to get back up and to try again until they develop the resilience and the skill to navigate a landscape that will never ever stop trying to knock them down. This applies to girls as well as boys, of course. Peterson tells a story about his own mother, who saw him about to get into a fight with another boy when he was a kid. She was watching from a distance. He could see that she knew what was happening. She walked right past. She didn't intervene. It hurt her. He knew that. Part of her wanted to run over and stop it. But she understood that there are some things a child has to face on his own. Years later, when he was having trouble with his father as a teenager, she said something he never forgot. If it was too good at home, you'd never leave. That's not cruelty, that's wisdom. That's a parent who loves her child enough to let him struggle, enough to let him fail, enough to trust that he has the strength to handle what's coming, or that he'll develop that strength in the attempt. If you care about young people, your children, your students, the next generation, then let them be challenged. Let them take risks. Let them skin their knees and bruise their egos and discover, through their own experience, what they're capable of. Don't smother them with safety. Don't protect them into helplessness. The world needs people who are strong, and strength is not built in the absence of resistance. Do not bother children when they are skateboarding. Rule 12. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. When Peterson's daughter Michaela was about 14 months old, he took her on a family trip to Cape Cod. At one point, he was sitting with her in the front seat of the car, while the rest of the family walked ahead. She was lying there in the sunshine, babbling to herself. He leaned in close to hear what she was saying. Happy, 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 happy. That's what she was like. A sunny child, easy to be around. The kind of kid who made the world feel a little lighter just by existing. When she turned 6, something changed. She became mopey, slow to get dressed, slow to walk anywhere. She lagged behind. She complained that her feet hurt and her shoes didn't fit. They bought her 10 different pairs. Nothing helped. She started climbing stairs one step at a time, like someone decades older. She complained when you held her hand. Peterson and his wife attributed it to the stress of a recent move. But it didn't get better. A physiotherapist tried to rotate Michaela's heel. It didn't move. That was not good. The diagnosis came soon after. Juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, 37 affected joints. Severe, the kind that doesn't go away. The prognosis, multiple joint replacements before she turned 30. What kind of world does this to a 6-year-old? What kind of God creates a place where a child who whispered happy, happy, happy to herself in the sunshine can have her body turn against her before she's old enough to understand why? This is the question that has haunted every parent of a sick child, every person who has watched someone they love suffer for no reason they can comprehend, every human being who has been forced to confront the apparent cruelty built into the fabric of existence. It is in many ways the question that this entire book has been circling around from the very first page. Michaela was put on methotrexate, a powerful chemotherapy agent, and naproxen. She had cortisol injected into her wrists, shoulders, ankles, elbows, knees, hips, fingers, toes, and tendons, all under general anesthetic. One day, her mother took her to the zoo. She had to push her in a wheelchair. That was not a good day. A new drug became available, etanercept, a biologic designed for autoimmune diseases. Michaela became the first Canadian child to receive it. Her mother accidentally administered 10 times the recommended dose for the first few injections. The result was almost miraculous. Within weeks, Michaela was running again, playing soccer, living like a normal kid. Her mother spent that entire summer just watching her run. Peterson wanted Michaela to control as much of her own treatment as possible. The drug had to be injected. She was 8 years old. He sat her down one evening and told her he'd give her $50 if she could do the injection herself. She struggled for 35 minutes, holding the needle against her thigh, unable to push it in. Then she did it. The next time, he paid her $20 and gave her 10 minutes, then $10 and 5 minutes. They stayed at 10 for a while. It was a bargain. For a few years, the disease went quiet. Michaela became completely symptom-free. The doctors began weaning her off the medication. Some children grow out of juvenile arthritis at puberty. No one knows why. Maybe she was one of the lucky ones. Then one day, her elbow started to ache. They went back to the hospital. The rheumatologist's assistant said, "You only have one actively arthritic joint, but one is a lot more than 0. One meant she hadn't grown out of it." The news demolished her for a month. Then her hip seized up. An MRI revealed joint deterioration. She was told she needed a hip replacement, not when she was 30, as originally predicted. Now, she was a teenager. Her hip was replaced. The surgery went well, but afterwards she was placed in an adult rehabilitation center. She was the youngest person there by 60 years. Her roommate couldn't sleep with the lights off and couldn't make it to the bathroom on her own. The nurse's station was right outside the door, alarms ringing constantly. There was no sleeping. The physiotherapist was on vacation. The one person who helped her was the janitor. She was supposed to be there 6 weeks. She stayed 3 days. When the physio returned, Michaela climbed the rehab center stairs and mastered every required exercise. They took her home. All that pain, all that surgery, she handled it. The terrible rehab center, with its indifference and incompetence, that gave her post-traumatic stress symptoms. Sometimes the institutional failure hurts worse than the disease. Then she needed a motorcycle license, because her mobility was too limited for public transit. On the first day of the course, she was training on a heavy motorcycle. She dropped it several times. She watched another rider tumble across the parking lot. On the morning of the second day, she was afraid to go back. She didn't want to leave her bed. Peterson talked it through with her. They decided she would at least drive back to the training site with her mother. If she couldn't manage it, she could stay in the car. On the way, her courage returned. She finished the course. When she received her certificate, every other student in the class stood and applauded. Then her right ankle disintegrated. The pain was worse than the hip had ever been. The doctors wanted to fuse the bones together, which would have caused the smaller bones in her foot to deteriorate next. She was still a teenager. That wasn't a solution. It was a delay before amputation. Peterson and his wife spent months investigating alternatives. They contacted specialists in India, China, Spain, the UK, Costa Rica, Florida. They wrote to the Provincial Ministry of Health, who located a surgeon in Vancouver. The ankle was replaced. After the surgery, Michaela was in agony. Her foot was mispositioned in the cast. The clinic wouldn't give her enough pain medication to cope. She had built up a tolerance from years of previous use. When she finally returned home, she began tapering off the opiates. She hated what they did to her. She said OxyContin turned her life gray. The withdrawal lasted months. Night sweats, formication, the sensation of insects crawling under her skin, and the complete inability to feel any pleasure at all. Peterson reflects on all of this, not as a case study, but as a father, and he arrives at something that is not an answer exactly, but something close to one, something he could live with. When his son Julian was about 3 years old, cute, small, fragile, prone to high fevers that sometimes made him delirious, Peterson thought about what it would take to truly protect him. He could make Julian 20 feet tall so no one could push him over. He could make him out of titanium so nothing could hurt him. He could give him a computer-enhanced brain. He could make him invulnerable, but that wouldn't be Julian anymore. That would be a robot, a monster. Everything that made Julian lovable, his smallness, his clumsiness, his wide-eyed vulnerability, was inseparable from his fragility. You cannot love something that cannot be hurt. You cannot cherish something that cannot be lost. The very qualities that make a person precious are the same qualities that make them breakable. There is an old Jewish story, Peterson writes, that asks a question structured like a riddle. Imagine a being who is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent, all-knowing, all-present, all-powerful. What does such a being lack? The answer: limitation. If you are already everything, everywhere, always, there is nowhere to go and nothing to become. Everything that could happen already has. Without limitation, there is no story. Without finitude, there is no meaning. Peterson connects this to the strange trajectory of Superman in popular culture. In the beginning, Superman could lift cars and outrun trains. Over the decades, writers kept expanding his powers until he could move planets, survive nuclear blasts, and travel faster than light. And then something unexpected happened. He became boring. The more powerful he got, the less interesting his story became. There was nothing he couldn't do, so there was nothing at stake. The franchise nearly died. It was saved only when writers took his powers away, made him weaker, more limited, more vulnerable, more human. Being requires limitation. A story requires constraint. A meaningful life requires the possibility of failure, loss, and suffering, because without those possibilities, nothing you do matters. If you can't lose, winning means nothing. If you can't be hurt, courage means nothing. If you can't die, life means nothing. This doesn't make the suffering acceptable. Peterson is not saying that his daughter's illness was a good thing or that it was somehow worth it. He is saying something more subtle and more honest, that the capacity for suffering and the capacity for love are not two different things. They are the same thing, viewed from different angles. You cannot have one without the other, and if you could somehow eliminate all suffering from existence, you would simultaneously eliminate everything that makes existence precious. So what do? When the weight is almost too much, when the news is bad and getting worse, when you can't see how things could possibly improve? Peterson offers some practical wisdom, drawn from the worst periods of his own family's experience. Set aside a specific time each day to think about the crisis. Don't let it consume every waking hour. Your anxiety systems are more interested in the existence of a plan than in the details. Having a designated time to worry actually reduces how much you worry the rest of the day. Don't schedule that time at night, or you won't sleep. And if you can't sleep, everything falls apart faster. Shrink the time horizon. When things are going well, you can plan for the next year, the next decade. When you're in the middle of a catastrophe, that's impossible. So don't try. Focus on the day. Get through today. Make today manageable. Do the next right thing, and then the thing after that. Sufficient unto the day are the evils thereof. That's not an invitation to carelessness. It's a survival strategy for the times when the future is too dark to look at directly. And then, pay attention. Even on the worst days, small things happen that are worth noticing. Maybe a little girl is dancing on the street in a ballet costume. Maybe you have a particularly good cup of coffee. Maybe, as Peterson puts it, you are walking down the sidewalk with your head spinning, and a cat appears. Dogs are wonderful companions. They're loyal, they're loving, they're eager to please. But cats are different. Cats are their own creatures. They aren't domesticated in the way dogs are. They've made a decision to live alongside human beings for their own mysterious reasons. When you meet a cat on the street and it comes to you, when it pushes its head against your hand and arches its back and permits you, for 30 seconds, to be in its good graces, that is a small, unearned gift. A brief moment of connection with something that didn't have to acknowledge you at all. If you are paying attention, if you are open to it, even on a terrible day, those moments exist. They won't fix what's broken. They won't cure the disease or mend the marriage or bring back the dead, but they are proof that the world contains beauty alongside its horror. That existence is not only suffering, that even in the depths, something small and startling and good can appear without warning and remind you, just for a moment, that being alive is worth it. Pet a cat when you encounter one on the street. Key takeaways. These last 6 rules have taken us into deeper water than the first 6. We started part 1 with posture and ended with personal responsibility. Here in part 2, we started with the nature of meaning itself and ended with the question of whether existence, with all its pain, is justified. Let me draw the thread one more time. Rule 7. Life demands sacrifice, not because the universe is punishing you, but because the future is real, and it can be made better if you're willing to give something up now. Expedience grabs what's available and ignores the cost. Meaning does the opposite. It asks what action would serve you, your family, and the world, not just today, but across time. Choose meaning. It's harder. It's also the only thing that lasts. Rule 8. Stop lying. You might not always know what's true, but you almost always know when you're being dishonest. Start there. Every lie you tell weakens the ground you're standing on. Every truth, even an uncomfortable one, strengthens it. Civilizations don't collapse because of external enemies. They collapse because the people inside them stop telling the truth. Rule 9. Listen, not to be polite, not as a tactic. Listen because you don't know enough, and the person across from you, confused, angry, inarticulate as they might be, might hold a piece of what you're missing. Real listening is not passive. It's one of the most demanding and transformative things a human being can do. Rule 10. Say what you mean. Name the problem. Define it precisely. Because what you refuse to articulate will grow in the dark until it devours everything. A small dragon that is acknowledged shrinks back to nothing. A small dragon that is ignored will carry your house away. Rule 11. Let people be challenged. Let children take risks. Let young men and women test themselves against real danger and discover, through their own effort, what they're capable of. A world that eliminates all risk does not produce safe people. It produces fragile ones, and fragile people shatter when the real storm comes. And Rule 12. Pay attention. Even when everything is falling apart, especially when everything is falling apart. There are small moments of beauty, of connection, of grace. They won't solve your problems, but they will remind you that existence is not only darkness. That meaning can be found, that the world, for all its horror, still contains things worth noticing. Taken together, all 12 rules form a single argument. It goes something like this: you are fragile, you are mortal, you will suffer, and the people you love will suffer, and there is nothing you can do to prevent that entirely. But you are not helpless. You can stand up instead of collapsing. You can take care of yourself instead of neglecting yourself. You can choose friends who challenge you to be better. You can measure your progress against your own past instead of someone else's highlight reel. You can raise your children with the discipline and love they need to thrive. You can take responsibility for your own life before you presume to fix the world. And then, having built that foundation, you can pursue meaning instead of cheap pleasure. You can tell the truth even when it's costly. You can listen to others as if they have something to teach you. You can speak precisely enough to keep the chaos at bay. You can let the people you care about face challenges that will make them strong, and you can keep your eyes open for the small, fleeting, startling moments of beauty that justify the whole terrible, magnificent, improbable enterprise of being alive. That is the antidote to chaos. That is what Jordan Peterson spent 20 years in clinical practice and a lifetime of study trying to articulate. Not a formula for happiness, not a guarantee of comfort, but a way of being, ancient, tested, demanding, and real, that is strong enough to carry you through. Closing, we started part 1 of this series on the ocean floor with a lobster, a creature that has been fighting for its place in the world since long before anything resembling a human being existed. And we've ended here in part 2 with a father watching his daughter struggle through years of pain and finding in the smallest moments reason enough to believe that existence is worth the cost. Between those two images, the ancient lobster and the sick child, lies the full range of what it means to be human, the biology that drives you, the self-contempt that holds you back, the friends who lift you up and the ones who drag you down, the comparisons that poison your perspective, the children who need your courage more than your comfort, the house that needs to be set in order before you dare point a finger at anyone else. And then the deeper questions, the meaning that emerges only from sacrifice, the truth that costs you something every time you tell it, the listening that transforms both the speaker and the hearer, the precision that keeps chaos from swallowing everything, the courage that comes from being allowed to fail, and the beauty, small, fleeting, unexpected, that makes the whole thing bearable. Peterson ends his book with a question. He was given a pen that could write in the dark, a pen with a light at its tip, and he asked himself, seriously, as if the answer mattered, what shall I do with my newfound pen of light? The answer he arrived at was this: write down the words you want inscribed on your soul. I think that's worth sitting with, not as a slogan, as an actual question directed at your actual life. What would you write if you had a pen like that? What words would be worthy of that kind of permanence? If this video gave you something worth thinking about, if even one of these 12 rules landed somewhere that mattered, leave a comment and tell me which one. I read every single one. And if you want the full experience of this book, I've left a link in the description to pick up your own copy on Amazon or Audible. Some books give you information. This one asks you to change. That's rarer than you think. Hit subscribe. There's a new book coming soon, and every book might be the one that changes everything.